Brandon Judd has served as a Border Patrol agent for the last 25 years and as president of the National Border Patrol Council since March 2013. His dual roles include protecting America's borders while ensuring that the best interests of all rank and file Border Patrol agents across the country are met. He's been called upon to testify before the U.S. Congress as an expert witness on border security on numerous occasions and is often consulted privately by policymakers in Capitol Hill. At the invitation of President Trump, Mr. Judd has participated with the President in multiple roundtables and press conferences to discuss measures to effectively secure the border. Mr. Judd has written numerous border security op-eds that have been published by multiple media outlets, including but not limited to USA Today, The Hill, Real Clear Politics, The Washington Times, and Fox News National. Would you welcome with me Mr. Brandon Judd?
It's great to be here. I see there's cameras here, so I won't walk around. Normally when I do a presentation, I like to move around, make eye contact with as many people as I can. Now, what's interesting is everywhere I go, I constantly get asked, what's the state of the border? Obviously, it's a very important issue. And I always get asked, how are the Border Patrol agents doing? How are we doing? How are we getting along? Well, let me give you a story, real good story, and this will give you an idea of my fellow agents and how we are and how we're wired. So I've got a really good friend. Her name is Samantha. I won't mention her last name, Smith. But Samantha is a Border Patrol agent, and she was in the process for the CIA. And look, I don't know, like law enforcement, don't like law enforcement, don't like how the FBI has been used for political reasons, whatever. Okay, the CIA is absolutely top-notch, top-notch. You have to be able to do anything and everything that the CIA wants you to do. We're talking about national security. Well, she's in the process for the CIA, and the CIA, they only take the best of the best. Well, she got down to the last three. And anybody that's been in law enforcement, you know that when you're getting hired on, you have to go before a panel of what will be your peers. And they pepper you with a bunch of questions. You don't have to get the questions right. You just have to use common sense. Not a CIA agent. You don't know exactly how they operate. NYPD, you don't know exactly how they operate. You just have to get the questions right. Well, Samantha was fantastic. She killed the physical test. She killed the written test. And now she was on to that last step. That step where you sit before your future peers and you have to answer those questions. Well, she was competing with an FBI agent and a DEA agent. They were the only ones. One position, three people, last three people. Samantha was ultimately the last one to go before this panel. The FBI agent was the first one. He goes in and he did a fantastic job. Absolutely knocked the questions out of the park. The last question that this panel of future maybe peers was, will you do anything and everything that the CIA asked you to do? And the FBI agent said, absolutely, I'll be glad to. They put a gun on the table in front of him and said, your wife's in the next room, you know what we want you to do. He said, I can't do that. They said, sorry, you're not CIA material. The DEA agent was next. He came in. Again, knocked all the questions out of the park. It was expected. Once you're down to the last three, you're expected to kill all the questions. Okay? Proverbially. Came down to the last question. Will you do anything and everything that the CIA needs you to do? The DEA agent said, absolutely. They put the gun in front of him. Said, your wife's in the next room. You know what we want you to do. He picked up the gun, took a couple steps, and stopped and says, I can't do that. And they said, thank you very much. You're not CIA material. Well, my friend, the Border Patrol agent, Samantha, whose last name won't be said, Smith, she came in and she, again, knocked it out of the park. Came down to the last question, CIA, will you do anything and everything that we need you to do? And she said, certainly. Put the gun in front of her, said, your husband's in the next room, you know what we want you to do. She didn't hesitate. She picked that gun up, went right into the next room. The next thing the panel hears, they hear a bunch of kicking and screaming, chairs hitting the wall. After about 10 minutes, and she's in insanely good shape, after about 10 minutes, she comes back out and she's sweating profusely. She said the gun was empty, I had to strangle the idiot. Your Border Patrol agents. Great, great, great bunch of people. Look, what we're facing now, we would have never, ever thought we would face in the history of my career, 25 years. I would have never thought that it would be like this. Algeria, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Gambia, Eritrea, Senegal, Bangladesh, Iraq, Iran, Russia, you name it, we're dealing with it. In fact, the United Nations identifies 195 countries around the world. 195. Last year, we dealt with 176. 176. This is unusual. Very unusual. This does not normally happen. This year, we're on pace to break that. Already dealt with 143 countries this year. And we're not even 6 months into the fiscal year. That's what we're dealing with. Take you back to 1997, when I originally came on duty with the United States Border Patrol. And by the way, I'm not here speaking as a Border Patrol agent. I have to give that disclaimer. There are a bunch of laws. I am still a federal employee, and there are a bunch of laws around what we can and can't do. Okay? I'm not here speaking as a Border Patrol agent, although by resume I am. I'm speaking here as the president of the National Border Patrol Council. But take you back to 1997, when I originally entered on duty with the Border Patrol. Back then, 98% of the people that we were dealing with were from Mexico. And yes, we were making apprehensions hand over fist. We were apprehending back in 1997 about 1.7 million apprehensions. But we weren't dealing with 1.7 million different people. We were dealing with the same people over and over and over again. In one shift, I apprehended the same group twice in one shift. Okay. That's what we were dealing with. If we made 1.7 million apprehensions, we dealt with, in a year, we dealt with probably 400,000 different people. It's called recidivism. You arrest the same person over and over and over again. Today, if we make 2.1 million apprehensions, which we surpassed that last year, a record, by the way. If we make 2.1 million apprehensions, we are most likely dealing with about 1.6 million different people. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And then you add on top of it what's happening with those individuals. So let me take you back to 1997 as well. Back in 1997, you had a bunch of what we called mom and pop organizations that dealt in the smuggling business, whether that was human smuggling. There's a huge difference between human smuggling and human trafficking, and I'll get into that. But whether it was human smuggling, whether it was human trafficking, whether it was drug smuggling, or whether it was any other contraband, we dealt with a lot of mom and pop organizations. That does not happen anymore. Everything on the border, all criminality is controlled by organized crime, what we call the cartels. And the cartel's different from the different regions on the border. In Arizona, where I came from, which by the way, it was 71 degrees when I left Tucson yesterday. In Arizona, where I came from, we're dealing with the Sinaloa cartel. The most dangerous cartel. The most deadly cartel. In the Rio Grande Valley, the area that's been on the news the most, that's the Gulf cartel. Okay? The difference between their business models, and again, make no mistake, they are a business. They are there to generate profit. It's an illegal business, but they generate profit. The Gulf cartel, what they operate in is they operate in higher volume or more people, lower cost. So it doesn't cost as much to get with the Gulf cartel. The trade-off is they're not going to move you into the United States. They're just going to cross you into the United States. And they're going to say, hey, wave your hands in front of the camera, say, hey, here I am, come pick me up. The Sinaloa cartel in Arizona, what they do is they deal in lower traffic, higher cost. Because they're going to get you into the United States and they're going to further your entry. They're not going to give up. They're not going to be what we call the give-ups. They're going to be what we call the gotaways. The people that evade apprehension. So the business models are different. The other thing that most people do not understand is the cartels, the individual cartels. They don't just deal in drugs, they don't just deal in human smuggling, they deal in it all, and they control it all. Every bit of it. In the news just 3 weeks ago, have you seen the price of eggs? Went to Costco, bought 5 dozen the other day. More than double the price of what it was just a couple months ago. Okay? We had eggs being smuggled into the United States. That's the cartels. They will look at any way they possibly can to generate profit. And if they feel that they can generate profit, they will smuggle that into the United States. And that's what we deal with. And we did not see that back in 1997. Even up through the Bush administration, Clinton administration to the Bush administration, to the Obama administration. It changed under the Obama administration. That's where it changed. Not the first 4 years. It was the second 4 years. In fact, in 2012, ICE deported more people under the Obama administration. ICE deported more people than in the history of ICE. But those people remained in custody. The Border Patrol would apprehend them. We would transfer them to ICE's custody. ICE would take them in custody. They would go through their process, and then they would be deported. Over 400,000 people were deported under ICE in 2012, the most ever. Last year, we set a record for apprehensions, the number of people that were apprehended at our borders. We set a record, over 2 million people. ICE only removed 70,000 of those people, 70,000. And the reason is because ICE does not have the not that they don't want to. Your ICE agents are phenomenal law enforcement personnel. They want to do their job. The problem is they do not have the resources to go out and capture the people that have been released into the United States. Those people that don't show up to their court appearances. I don't know if you all watched. I got to sit on Fox News and give commentary during the hearing that Jim Jordan was giving last week. And during the hearing, you had Adam Schiff. Anybody like Adam Schiff? Love the guy. Absolutely love the guy. Wish I could be his best friend. Adam Schiff got up there, and of course, when you don't have facts, when you don't have evidence, what you do is you demonize law enforcement. You pull out the race card. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't racism. I would never ever say that. But when you don't have facts, that's what you do. You pull out the race card and you demonize law enforcement. And what Adam Schiff said was that all these people are trying to do is flee persecution. They're coming to the United States to flee persecution. And yet, everybody says that they're bad people, that they're criminals, this, that, and the other. Okay? Not true. Of course it's not true. Because if it were true, we would welcome these people in to our country with open arms. We are the most generous country in the entire world. We take in more refugees than any other country in the world. We do that when there is we're supposed to do that when there is a legitimate reason. If these people had a legitimate claim to be in the United States, they would show up to all of their court appearances. They don't. They abscond and disappear into what President Obama termed the shadows of society. Where's Adam Schiff's facts? He doesn't care about facts because he doesn't need facts. All he has to do is spew political rhetoric, and MSNBC, CNN, ABC, they will all run with what he says. And so the American people don't understand what's actually going on the border. And that's the problem that we face today. If you look at poll after poll after poll, it clearly shows that a majority of the American people want the border secured. We call it an 80-20 issue. There are very few issues in this country that are 80-20. 80% of the population wants something done, 20% pushes against it. Border security is an 80-20 issue. The vast majority of the American people want a secure border. The problem is the mainstream media is telling the American people that the border is secure. And then on top of that, you have the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security that gets on MSNBC, ABC, CBS, all of those mainstream media, and he then says the border is secure. The American people are supposed to believe a cabinet-level official. And that's the problem that we face today. The vast majority of the public would not allow what is going on our borders today. if they knew actually what's going on. So let me tell you how the cartels are so effective and how they beat me every single day. Every single day. What they do and what they know is all they have to do is go throughout the entire world and advertise that if you give them several $1,000s, they will bring them to the Mexico-United States border. They will cross them into the United States, and all they have to do is wave their hands in the air and say, "Here I am, come take me into custody." And the problem with that is when they cross these large groups, 100, 200, 400, even 600, when they cross these large groups, it pulls resources out of the field. What we have to do is we then have to go and respond to that area. To take 600 people into custody, that's going to require a minimum of 25 Border Patrol agents. Well, we only have a finite number of Border Patrol agents, and when 25 get deployed to that area, what it does is it creates gaps in our coverage. And when there's gaps in our coverage, that's when they run their higher value products. That's when they bring the fentanyl into the United States. That's when the special interest countries, that's when aliens from special interest countries, those countries that want to do us harm, that's when they cross them in. That's when they cross the criminal aliens into the country. Just a couple days ago, Bill Malusian reported that there was an Iranian national that was apprehended in the trunk of a car, and he was apprehended not by the Border Patrol. He was apprehended by Texas DPS, which, by the way, that is not Texas DPS's job. That is the Border Patrol's job. If it wasn't for Texas DPS filling in that gap that was left, that was created, that Iranian national would be in the United States today. He did not want to be apprehended, so you tell me what his purpose was. And again, I am not vilifying Iranians by any stretch of the imagination. There are many, many, many good Iranian nationals. This individual did not want to be caught. He knew that all he had to do was cross the border illegally, say, "Hey, here I am." I would have taken him into custody, I would have processed them, and he would have still been released into the United States, because that's what's happening today. So let's look at the issue that happened. Obama, go back to President Obama. What the cartels learned was that they understood that they could exploit our system. They could exploit loopholes in the system. They understood that there's only so much what we call bed space in federal detention facilities. You can only hold so many people. So what happens when you exceed that number of bed space? Cartels realize that people start getting released under what we call NTAs, or notices to appear. We release them into the United States. ICE only has the potential to hold 55,000 people in custody at any given time. That's their capacity. Yet we are dealing with nearly 200,000 people every single month. And a deportation proceeding takes about 6 months. So you have to hold 55,000 people for 6 months. Well, what happens to all the rest of them? They get released into the United States. And this is where Adam Schiff is lying to you. He's saying that they're coming over here because they're fleeing persecution. Well, if that was the case, they would then have a legitimate claim to be here in the United States, and they would show up to their court appearances. They don't. The moment we release them, they will show up to their initial appearances, because that initial appearance grants them work permits, allows them to put their children in school, allows them social benefits. That's why they'll show up to their initial court appearances. And they will show up to all of the court appearances in order to keep those benefits. But once they have to show up to that final appearance, where they have to present themselves before a judge, and they have to prove that they have a legitimate claim to be here in the United States, that's when they disappear. That's when they cut that ankle bracelet that's monitoring where they're at. That's where they cut it. Those cell phones that you heard about, that's when they throw them into the Hudson, is when they have to show up to that final appearance. And because ICE doesn't have the resources to go out there and find them, they're never leaving. They're here to stay. In the next 2 years, at the pace that we are on, between the people that we release and the ones that get away, that we know of, we are on pace to add 7 million more people to our population in the next 2 years. In the first 2 years of the Biden administration, we added nearly 4.5 million people to our population in the first 2 years. But that number just keeps going up and up and up as the months go along. And that's what we're facing today. So the solution. It's great to talk about problems. We can identify problems as much as we want. We've had solutions. I got to work with the Trump administration. President Trump, you can go and you can YouTube it. He says that he used to call me on a regular basis. I got to work with President Trump on what the solutions were. The simple solution is you must hold people in custody pending their asylum or deportation proceedings. And if you do that, they will stop coming. So the argument's going to be is we don't have the room. We can't hold 200,000 people. There's not enough bed space for that. That's true. But the moment you start holding people in custody, it's 2 weeks and they stop coming. Because what's going to happen is they're not going to spend thousands of dollars. They're not going to give thousands of dollars to the criminal cartels just to be held in custody and sent back to their country. Well, President Trump took it a step further, and it was a brilliant idea. We always talk about don't recreate the wheel, do what we already know what's working. Well, he did. He did recreate the wheel. He created the Remain in Mexico program. And the moment we took people in custody and said, that's fine, our laws allow you to claim asylum, but you're going to wait in Mexico. We're going to send you back to Mexico. And you're going to wait in Mexico pending the adjudication of the entire process of your asylum or deportation claims. And then if you don't have that, you'll go back to your country. Guess what happened? Everybody stopped coming. We dropped to 45-year lows in apprehensions. And when we did that, we were then able to go after the cartel's profits. We were able to keep the fentanyl, the dangerous drugs, out of the country. It's amazing because you're always going to hear the Democrats, you're going to hear the liberals say, it all comes through the ports of entry. No, all you have to do is look at the pandemic. During the pandemic, the ports of entry were closed except to essential traffic. Only a third of the normal traffic was going through the ports of entry. Yet during the pandemic, we had more fentanyl on our streets than in the history of the United States. Where was it coming? It was coming between the ports of entry when they pulled Border Patrol agents out of the field. So under President Trump, when we dropped to 45-year lows, we were then able to go after the cartels. We were able to go after their profits. And when you go after their profits, you're able to be successful in keeping your children, your grandchildren, safe. Every single day in the United States, there are hundreds of people that die of fentanyl overdose. And that is coming from Mexico into the United States. Precursors come from China into Mexico. Mexico then puts it into the pill form, smuggle it into the United States, and it's coming across our borders. Then on top of that, you have to look at the human trafficking. The difference between smuggling and trafficking. When you smuggle somebody into the United States, you let them go once they get in. Trafficking means you're going into indentured servitude. Whether that's in the sex trade, the sweatshops, it doesn't matter. I don't know how many of you, and I make a fairly decent living, I don't know how many of you have $35,000 just laying around to give to a criminal organization to be smuggled to a different country. Well, neither do these people from China. Neither do these people from Uzbekistan. Neither do these people from Russia. So what happens is they're brought over and they go into indentured servitude until that fee is paid off. And it's all driven by liberal policies. If it wasn't for liberal policies, we could secure that border tomorrow. Not only would we safeguard the lives of your children and your grandchildren, but we would also safeguard the lives of those people that want to come into the United States. James Epling went into the Colorado River to save 4 migrants from China, he lost his life. I personally performed life-saving measures on an individual in the Jacumba Mountains in El Centro, California, right outside of El Centro, California. I watched her take her last breath because a smuggler left her because she couldn't keep up with the group. I will never forget that image. On a lighter note, how many people do you think you can fit in a Ford Bronco? I'm going to, but I got to tell you the story first. So the way you look at criminal cartels, and I'm going to turn it over to questions right after this. The way you look at criminal cartels, you look at how they operate. They're amazingly efficient. They recognize that we have policies. Law enforcement has policies that they have to follow. And so when criminals drive erratically or get too dangerous, what's going to happen is the law enforcement officer is going to be called off of the pursuit. So what we saw in El Centro, California, and early in my career, well, what happened is these vehicles would drive across the border. This was pre-fence. Vehicles would drive across the border. They would hit the interstate, and I worked midnight shift. They would hit the interstate, and they would drive down westbound lane of the interstate. The moment we would get behind them and we would light them up or turn on our emergency lights to make a vehicle stop, what they would do is they would shut their lights off, cross the median, and drive into oncoming traffic because they knew that I would then be pulled off. Well, some idiot smuggler didn't get this memo. And when I lit them up, when I turned the lights on, they went north into the desert. Well, in the desert out there in El Centro, California, it's a bunch of dunes. And they hit dunes, rolled 3 times, and I was amazed. There were 16 people in a Ford Bronco. No seats whatsoever, except for the driver's seat. No seats. How many of those people do you think were injured? The driver died. 2 other people broke their arms. Nobody else was hurt. You know why? Because they were packed in there so dadgum tight that when it rolled. But that's what these smugglers do. That's what we face every day. There are solutions, but if there isn't the political will, we won't be able to deal with this. With that being said, turn it over to questions.
All right. Next one. All right, first question. Should the border states declare war because the feds are abdicating their duty to secure the border?
So I know Governor Abbott very well. I speak with him on a regular basis. The reason why they do not declare an invasion, the reason why Governor Abbott has not, and by the way, Governor Abbott, he pushes the envelope as it is. The Supreme Court has already ruled that illegal immigration or border security is the federal government's job, not the state's job. They struck down SB 1070 in the state of Arizona. Governor Abbott, if he declares an emergency and actually removes people immediately under that declaration of emergency, that goes into civil rights. And if he gets sued and the Supreme Court goes in the same direction as what they did with SB 1070, the state of Texas would lose billions of dollars in lawsuits. And he's not willing to give away billions of dollars of taxpayers' money in order to declare that. So he's doing everything else that he can possibly do. The Supreme Court has ruled that it is the federal government's job for border security.
All right, the border cartels, can you map their tentacles in the U.S. and beyond? And how do you combat that at the border and beyond?
Yes, absolutely. We know that the cartels work throughout the entire United States. It's not just in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, or California. It's here in New York, it's in Iowa, it's in Florida, it's in Michigan. It's throughout the entire United States. They have networks in which they traffic. The problem is when you're dealing with the number that we're dealing with, it's nearly impossible to kick free the resources that are necessary to go after those cartels. That's why illegal immigration, that's why the number of people that cross the border illegally is very important, because when we drop that number down, then we can go after the cartels and we can reach out and find them in Iowa, in New York.
With the mega fentanyl import amounts, could they be targeting our water supplies into our farmland?
I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't think that that's what they want to do. It's not necessarily about killing as many people as they possibly can. Maybe if it was China. But they're about generating a profit. And the more people you kill, the less profit that you're going to make. You know, look, as bad as it is, 140,000 US lives, well, you're going to be able to replace that with customers. You stick it in the water supply and you kill millions of people. Now where do your customers come from?
Kind of a related question. Anything behind a cartel burning down the third largest egg farm in the nation in Bosra, Connecticut? Anything knowledge of that?
I don't. I'm sorry, I wish I did, but I don't have any knowledge whether that was cartel driven or not.
Can you speak to, is there anything coming through Chinese control of many port entries?
So the ports of entry are not controlled by Chinese by any stretch of the imagination, but yes, large drug flows come through the ports of entry. They come between the ports of entry. So in the federal government, you have the agency, which is Customs and Border Protection. And within Customs and Border Protection, you have three main law enforcement entities. You've got the Office of Field Operations. They're the ones that work at the ports of entry. You've got the Border Patrol. We're the ones who work between the ports of entry. And then you've got Air and Marine. They're the ones that operate our helicopters, our airplanes, and the boats. Those three law enforcement entities work in conjunction together to try to create border security. The problem is without proper policies, programs, and operations, it doesn't matter.
Is the border wide open due to the fact that the US, Canada, and South America are considering themselves one unit?
No, the borders are wide open because it's about profit. It's about how much money can we bring in. Now, what's interesting, and talking about other countries, you have to ask yourself, why would Mexico want this to end? And they don't. They absolutely do not want this to end. Billions of dollars are generated, and that revenue goes back into their economy. The only reason that Mexico was willing to accept the migrant protection protocols, which, by the way, we can't just send people from Iraq back to Mexico. They have to agree to take them back. And if they don't, we have to keep them in our custody. That's throughout the entire world. Doesn't matter what nation it is. If it's not a Mexican national, which they do have to take back their own nationals. What they understand and they recognize is what President Trump did that was so brilliant was he threatened tariffs that were greater than the profit that the cartels were able to bring in. And because he threatened those tariffs and it was going to cut into their economy, that's why Mexico acquiesced and that's why Mexico agreed. But they do not want to end what is currently happening. That is billions of dollars that is going right into their economy.
How are sanctuary cities affecting the influx of illegal aliens?
So we call them magnets. There are certain things that draw people, or there's certain things that the cartels are able to go throughout the world and advertise their services. Because that's what happens. What the cartels do is they go throughout the world and they say, give me a couple $1,000s and I'm going to get you to the United States. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do, what you need to say to stay in the United States. Sanctuary cities is one of those magnets. That's one of the things that the cartels are able to go throughout the world and say, look, all you got to do is go to San Francisco, go to Los Angeles, go to New York City, Eric Adams. Go to those cities and you'll be able to stay because they will not honor ICE detainers. And that's one of the magnets that they're able that's one of the selling points and one of the magnets that draw people to cross our borders illegally.
Can a government agency involved in the chase with illegal immigrants get sued if someone gets hurt, even if they are not citizens?
Yes. The individual agent is indemnified. So if I'm in a pursuit and I'm following my policies and the laws and somebody gets hurt, they can't sue me personally, but they absolutely can sue the government. Now, whether that lawsuit's going to be upheld, depending upon what they were doing, that's going to be up to the courts. The courts will determine whether or not that's a legitimate lawsuit. But yes, they absolutely can file lawsuits, and lawsuits have been successfully won against agencies.
Okay. And how is New York being affected in ways we aren't aware by the border crisis? How many immigrants is it estimated are being sent to New York?
New York City is the perfect example right now. Look, as much as I don't like him, as much as I don't like his politics, I love it when Eric Adams gets on the TV. Because every single time he opens his mouth, the mainstream media has to cover it. And when the mainstream media covers it, then the public says, hey, what's really going on? And then they're going to gravitate to the Fox News. We have a podcast, Ms. Cox, right here. they're going to gravitate to the locations where they can find out what is actually happening, what's going on. So I love when Eric Adams opens his mouth, but we're seeing right now, Eric Adams has dealt with about 30,000 people that have been sent to New York City. That is a drop in the bucket compared to what Texas, Arizona, Phoenix, Austin, Houston, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what they're dealing with, yet Eric Adams says that he cannot afford, and he can't. He can't afford what it costs to house 30,000 people, what it costs to feed 30,000 people. That's how you're affected. When children that don't have a right to be here in the United States are put in schools, that money comes out of your pockets. When they go to the emergency room or a hospital and they can't pay the bill, that comes out of your pocket. When you have to house them, that comes out of your pocket. Then on top of that, the crime that is committed. Did you see what just happened at that hotel in Hell's Kitchen? Okay, when they refuse to leave, why wouldn't you? We taught them that it's okay. We taught them that it is okay to violate our laws, and you'll be rewarded when you violate those laws. Why wouldn't you refuse? That's what we're doing. We are conditioning them to understand what the loopholes are and how to exploit those loopholes.
All right, thank you. Show your appreciation for Mr. Judd. All right, thank you.